They are tumbling through space above the moon with no idea if they can stop it. Inside the Lunar Module, the world will not stay still. The windows flash black sky, then gray surface, then black sky again as the spacecraft rolls violently out of control. Tom Stafford grabs the controls and fights the machine with both hands. The spacecraft keeps spinning. John Young's voice cuts through the radio from orbit above them. "We're wobbling." He's trying to sound calm, but everyone listening knows this is bad. This is May 1969, 2 months before humanity attempts to land on the moon for the first time. Apollo 10 is supposed to be the final rehearsal, the mission that proves the landing can work. Instead, 3 astronauts are fighting to survive above another world. Stafford feels his body slam against the restraints as the lunar module twists through space. The cabin shakes. Instruments blur. In Houston, the flight controllers stare silently at the incoming data. The spacecraft is rotating across all 3 axes. Faster, harder, more violently every second. If the crew cannot stop the spin, they may lose control completely. And if that happens out here, there is nowhere to land, nowhere to run, and no rescue mission coming after them. Only the moon waiting below. The public has no idea this is happening. To the world, Apollo 10 is another confident step toward history. But inside the spacecraft, fear has already taken over. 5 days earlier, they launched from Kennedy Space Center aboard a Saturn V rocket.
17 seconds and counting, guidance internal, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. Engines on, 5, 4, 3, 2, all engines running. Launch command, liftoff. We have liftoff, 29 minutes past the hour.
363 feet of controlled explosion carrying 3 men away from Earth. Tom Stafford, John Young, Gene Cernan. All experienced pilots, all fully aware that one failure inside this machine would kill them before anyone on Earth could help. The mission sounded simple when NASA described it on television. Fly the lunar module toward the moon. Test the systems. Inspect the future landing site. Then come home. But space has a way of turning simple plans into deadly situations. The lunar module had never operated this close to the moon before. No human being had ever flown thousands of feet above the lunar surface inside a machine built from thin metal wiring fuel and hope. If the engine failed, they died. If the ascent stage malfunctioned, they died. If they lost control near the surface, there would be no second chance. Only silence. Stafford and Cernin separated from the command module and began descending toward the moon while John Young remained alone in orbit above them. The farther they dropped, the quieter the cabin became. Every sound mattered now. Every number mattered. Below them, the moon grew larger and more detailed with every passing second. The ground was no longer distant. It was rising toward them, fast. The descent continued. Velocity stable, altitude stable. Everything looked normal, until Stafford noticed something strange in the instruments. A flicker, a hesitation. The radar readings shifted briefly before settling again. Small enough to ignore, dangerous enough not to. Houston examined the numbers and told them it was probably interference from the lunar surface. Probably. That word hung inside the cabin. Because probably is not comforting when you are falling toward another world. Stafford made the decision. They had gone low enough. They had proven the lunar module could operate near the surface. Now they needed to leave. He fired the ascent engine. The spacecraft surged upward away from the moon. For a brief moment, everything felt stable again. Then the lunar module started moving strangely. A small oscillation, then another. The guidance system began feeding conflicting commands into the spacecraft. Stafford corrected. The spacecraft pushed back. The controls no longer felt connected to the machine around them. And suddenly, the lunar module rolled hard to one side. Cernan felt his stomach drop. The stars outside the window spun violently across his vision. The moon disappeared beneath them, then snapped back into view again. The spacecraft pitched, rolled, and yawed all at once. John Young's voice came through the radio from orbit above them. Calm, controlled, professional. But underneath the procedure, there was fear. Everyone understood what was happening. They were losing control above the moon. Stafford shut off the guidance system. In training, that decision feels technical. In reality, it means turning off the system designed to keep you alive while your spacecraft tumbles through deep space. He switched to manual control. His hands locked around the controls while alarms flashed across the cabin and the spacecraft continued twisting through space. Cernan watched the horizon spin outside the window. Black sky, gray surface, black sky again. The spacecraft was no longer responding the way it should. It felt alive, and it was fighting them. Stafford made tiny corrections with the controls. Careful movements, precise movements. Too much force and the spin could become even worse. Seconds stretched endlessly. The cabin shook around them. The moon spun beneath them. One mistake here and the mission would end in darkness. Then slowly the rotation began to weaken. The stars steadied. The horizon stopped tumbling. The lunar module stabilized. Neither astronaut said a word. They had just survived the moment where control nearly vanished forever. But the danger still was not over. The ascent engine was firing hard and they were climbing rapidly back toward orbit. If they failed to reconnect with John Young, they could become trapped around the moon with limited fuel and no realistic way home. Houston fed them numbers, velocities, angles, corrections. Stafford flew manually while Cernan calculated beside him. Above them, John Young waited alone inside the command module, watching the radar and hoping they appeared where they were supposed to appear. The distance closed. 50 miles, 40, 30. Then Stafford finally saw it, a tiny shape floating against the blackness, the command module, the only path home. They approached carefully. Too fast and they could collide. Too slow and they could drift apart forever. Young's voice finally came across the radio. "I see you." For the first time in hours, the fear inside the cabin eased slightly. Stafford guided the lunar module forward. The docking hardware aligned. Metal connected with metal. Locks engaged. They were together again. Only then did the astronauts finally breathe. Back in Houston, engineers spent days trying to understand what nearly killed the crew. The problem came from conflicting guidance signals combined with radar data that confused the computer at exactly the wrong moment. The spacecraft had begun fighting its own controls. It was a failure nobody predicted because nobody had ever attempted a mission like this before. If Stafford had reacted seconds later, the spin might have become impossible to stop. Apollo 10 would have ended above the moon. And 2 months later, there may never have been an Apollo 11 landing, only 3 astronauts disappearing into space while the world listened helplessly from Earth. But Stafford regained control. Cernan stayed focused while the cabin spun around him. Young guided them home from orbit above. Human beings pushed themselves to the edge of another world and barely escaped what waited there. 9 days after launch, Apollo 10 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. Photographers captured smiling astronauts climbing from the capsule. They looked exhausted. They looked relieved. They did not look like men who had almost died above the moon. Most people never learned how close the mission came to disaster. By the time the details became public, Apollo 11 had already changed history. The moon landing overshadowed everything that came before it. Apollo 10 became remembered as the rehearsal, the practice run before the famous mission. But that is not what it felt like inside the lunar module while the spacecraft spun above the moon and stopped obeying its pilots. Apollo 10 was not a rehearsal to the men inside it. It was survival. 3 astronauts alone above another world, discovering in real time that space does not forgive mistakes, and machines do not care whether human beings live or die. And for a few terrifying moments, the only thing standing between them and the darkness below was a human hand gripping a control stick and refusing to let go.